Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second in Klein's new series of In Conversation With, where I'm interviewing some of the senior experts within Klein's energy practice on the most relevant and challenging topics in the lubricants industry. So today we're addressing the topic of sustainability and its impact on the lubes industry. Now, sustainability is a complex topic. Just this morning when I was getting ready, I was thinking, what earrings shall I wear? And I thought, oh, I've got these great sustainable earrings. And I thought they're sustainable because they're made of recycled plastic. Excellent, sustainable earrings, how appropriate for the Q&A this afternoon. But then I thought, hold on, my mum bought those earrings in New Zealand and shipped them all the way air freight to London. So does that still make them sustainable? But surely that plane was going to go anyway, right? So yeah, surely sustainable. And furthermore, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, has the exact same earrings. So if I wanted to, I can make a smooth segue into New Zealand's sustainability initiatives when I wear them. So now my recycled plastic, air freighted from New Zealand, sustainability topic generating earrings, are they sustainable? And if they're not, if I wear them loads of times, will they become more sustainable? I don't know the answer to that question. Hopefully today, with my esteemed colleague Yana Wilkinson joining me, we'll be able to answer some better questions regarding the lubricants value chain. So thanks, Yana. Let me firstly introduce ourselves and where we come from in the Klein company business. We're both part of Klein's energy team, focusing on the lubricants value chain and specialty products. You likely know our syndicated reports very well, but Yana and I actually come from our management consulting team and custom research practice, where we help clients with a range of topics from growth strategy, market entry, acquisition searches, and all sorts of other bespoke research and custom insights. I'm the Global Business Development Director and have been at Klein over 5 years. Prior to this, I ran the PIMS Lubricants and Greases Global Benchmarking Project, which looked at the operating cost and productivity of lube and grease plants all around the world. Prior to that, I was a wastewater engineer in Christchurch, New Zealand, before moving to London over a decade ago. Yana Wilkinson with me has over 15 years experience in research, market intelligence and consulting, mainly in growth and strategy consulting. For 7 years, she's been part of Klein's energy practice with a particular focus on the lubricants value chain. And for the last 2 years, she's been leading the energy consulting practice globally. Yana has led, participated or developed over 50 projects related to various aspects of the lubricants value chain across all regions. She's broadly passionate about our industry, but tells me she has a particular love for all things industrial, digital, and sustainable, ideally all at the same time. So welcome, Yana. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Annie, and a great introduction. Yeah.
Thanks. A bit of comedy to kick us off with. Now, first, Yana, before we get into it, how have you been engaging on this sustainability topic recently?
Well, I think, Annie, in the same way you have been used the analogy of the earrings very nicely, and perhaps it will only resonate with some of our participants. But I think what is, you probably, first of all, thank you so much for giving an hour of your time. It's probably not the first and certainly not the last conversation you're having about sustainability. We were worried a little bit about the topic fatigue. And so therefore we took a while to actually land on what is that we are going to say as Klein. So we believe, like Annie said, it's important that you find your own angle at the topic because the topic is big, complex. So what we try to do, we are advocates of our industry. And quite often you will hear me throughout this meeting saying us, because I genuinely see us as energy practice within Klein as a part of the lubricant industry. So we want to be useful. And so the way we make ourselves useful to you, hopefully through a lot of interaction, some of you, we had the pleasure of having us as our clients, is by helping people make decisions and providing the information that helps you focus on the right things. And so when we have been preparing for this webinar for over 2 months, and every day something interesting came up, and it was very tempting to just jump on different topics and say, oh, why don't we include this? Why don't we include that? But we try to stay focused. And what we try to do, we focused on the approach that is around framing. So what we want to make sure is that when you walk out of this meeting, you at least are clear where to start, what could be the next or the first step, and sort of connecting the high level constructs such as UN sustainability goal, which there are lots of other companies and lots of other people who can speak with a lot more depth. So what we try to do is connect macro to micro, make it as actionable as possible, And we tried to stay away from any emotionally or politically charged topics, because we think there is a lot of common ground that we all have. And so instead of focusing on the fringes, which typically generate some of those kind of biggest debate, we'll focus on the things that we are sure about, to make sure that nothing stops us from actually take the next best step. Mm-hmm. And we are very cognizant that what today we're focusing on the environmental side of sustainability. There are more things to sustainability than just environment or carbon footprints. So, but we had to spend this hour on something. So we chose to be a little bit more focused. And hopefully you will be the judges of whether we succeeded or not. So that will be sort of, that will be the pitch for the hour of your time.
Great. Thanks, Yana. I think that's a really good kind of context of the discussion we're going to have today. Logistically, how is it going to work? Well, it is designed this out as a Q&A, but to provide some structure and some takeaways for you, we have prepared some slides in advance based on our current thinking, as well as some of the questions that you asked in advance. We've tried to respond to within those slides. But as Vera mentioned, there is the Q&A box, so please ask questions there, preferably there, not the chat. Feel free to chat about other things over there if you want to. But any questions, please put them in the Q&A chat, and I'll try to incorporate some as we go. But otherwise, we'll pull them all together at the end. Now, before we get stuck in, we did just want to take a gauge of the room to see where everyone was at with this topic, and what people thought were their biggest concerns with regard to implementing sustainability strategy currently. And then at the end of the session, or towards the end of the session, we'll share the results of this poll with you. So Vera, if you could pop up the poll quickly.
Yes, I'm working on this. Give me 1 second.
Here we go. So hopefully all of you can see this poll. We've got 6 answers to the poll. So if you can just select 3 out of them about what your biggest challenges are, we'll give you a little bit of silence, but to quickly run through them. Is it lack of clarity, lack of data? Is it complexity of translating corporate KPIs into your team? Is it lack of resources, lack of clear signals from the market, or a shortage of sustainable raw materials? So if you can just select 3, don't need to overthink it. I'll give you a little bit of silence because it's a little bit lengthy. Make sure you scroll down to see all 6 answers. Thank you. Just give you 30 more seconds. Looks like most of you have answered it. Okay, Vera, you can keep it going for a little bit longer, just while the last few people finish. But in the meantime, I will continue on with I'll actually see if I can share the slides. That might work in the meantime. Got so many screens. Okie dokie. So you should be able to see my screen again, right?
Yes, okay. It's there.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, Vera, please close the poll in a minute or so. Just leave the last few people to finish up, and then we'll share the results at the end. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts at the beginning. Very interesting results, and I think it will help really generate some interesting discussion towards the end. Okay, as Yana said, there's a lot of buzz around this topic, a lot of discussion, a lot of content, a lot of announcements from various players, industries, associations around ESG, UN sustainability goals, all sorts of related topics. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to host this Q&A today, is because we really want to find a way to cut through all this noise that's going on and try to figure out how this kind of complex theme and all this noise and what it really means for our lubricants industry. So Yana, when you're discussing this topic with colleagues and clients, how do you frame it?
Right. So first of all, I start with the caveat that whatever I'm sharing with you could potentially change tomorrow. And it's not because I'm trying to be vague, but that's because that's the right way of looking at it. So, and if we sort of click quickly, so first thing, when we were preparing, we started to reflect, how are the questions that you have been asking us, we have been discussing internally, how they have been changing? Because when you tackle a topic that is very complex, that is constantly changing, if you can't get the right answers, at the minimum, you need to make sure you're asking the right questions. And so just to be a little bit provocative, I'm asking ourselves and you, and hopefully we can have a good debate about it. Are we asking the right questions? So in the past, I would say let's say 5 years ago, when we started these conversations, there were a few and far between, and to give some companies credit, they were early in these conversations when no one else was demanding that. And so the questions, the majority of conversation was about, should we not do it? Is it real? Are there really any incentives? Are we going to be punished or incentivized? So the overall kind of mentality was really very much about, it's about compliance and it's about risk. Now, what has changed, and this is very interesting, I'm sure you feel the same, even if we take not just the last year, but if we take last 3 to 6 months, the conversation has changed dramatically. Yeah. And that's why we wanted to today to sort of shift the focus to, these are the must-have topics that you need to be discussing inside your companies. But even if we look at our most recent conversation, the recent past, they still very much about the proof of concept. So I think we have all been convinced that it's time to do something, but the question is what? So instead of trying to frame it a little bit, some of the conversations immediately went into, should we be using bio? Should we be using re-refined? Or will my customers pay premium? Or should they have a report because other people's also having a report? And not to say that they're the wrong questions, but if you were to build a hierarchy of questions, would this really be on top? And so what our opening foray and into this webinar is to say what we think we should be asking, and this should be the order of priority. First of all, we should be asking ourselves, do I really understand what my footprint is? So it's a little bit like Annie's logic about the earrings. So I say they're good or bad, but do I have enough evidence? And so searching for evidence is a discipline in itself. So then the question is, okay, once you understood, even if imperfectly, what is your own footprint is, then I should act on what is my own 80-20. What are the most impactful areas where I can make the most change? And those areas are going to be different for different companies. So even if you have heard or have seen other companies doing an amazing job in terms of their analysis, it doesn't mean that everything will be directly applicable to you. And ultimately, and this is one of the probably key starting points we would like to say, that unlike the other topics we tackled as an industry, and goodness knows, we tackled complex topics like REACH, like VGP, a lot of things that have been imposed on the industry by the regulation, by the change in specifications from the OEM side, but sustainability is different. It's not just a technical problem to solve. In some ways, you have to decide what is your strategic angle. Do you want to be a leader? The leaders are the ones who take risks, recognizing that no, you would not know the answer to some of your questions, but you still choose to proceed. Mm-hmm. Or are you going to be an early follower, or are you going to be a late follower? None of it is good or bad, but it has to be consistency between what you choose to do and where you put your money and time. And so ultimately, with the last question, which is really important, who I should work with, because unlike the technical topics, which are possible to work through just with a narrow circle of your own people and your immediate suppliers and customers, this is a big one. And we will be discussing what makes it so complex. So you've got to be asking yourself, who am I going to collaborate with? And collaboration, and it's a capability in its own right. But ultimately, where we would like to open with to say, really, no matter, the perfect is the enemy of the good. So what should be your first step? Whatever your first step, measure, and then decide what matters to you. And so that is, I think, how we have been internally discussing, but also before we jump into bio, refined, or any other complex topics, for us, this is very important to set out. Yeah. This is a strategic debate, not necessarily tactical.
Yes, yes, definitely. And so to help us, I think that certainly lays the land well of how we're thinking about it. But in order to have this discussion, right, we need to sort of do a little bit of language 101 on sustainability language 101, let's say. So there's a lot of terminology out there. One in which that I hear most often discussed is the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And these from the GHG protocol, right? Now, just to quickly run over the definitions of these scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Scope 1 is your direct emissions from your own company, and for example, emissions from a combustion in owned or controlled boilers. Scope 2, which is on the left there, is any emissions bought from third-party providers from electricity. And scope 3 are emissions as a consequence of the activities of the company, but occur from sources not owned by your company, right? So we hear a lot about these measuring your scope 1, scope 2, and 3 emissions. So is this where companies should be starting to focus their efforts with regard to trying to quantify or count or measure? And what implications is this having, Yana?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have gone on our own learning curve. And so the learning is, are these topics difficult? Without a doubt, you need to spend quite a few hours even trying to understand. But if you take some time to understand the GHG protocol, you actually have quite a lot of understanding about what you should be doing. So, Annie, if you could bring another visual, which I think is quite important, you would typically come across. And again, please allow us to just work through a couple of vocabulary things, because we will be using these words during the presentation. So it's important we're on the same page. If you want, there are 2 different types of metrics you will see in sustainability report. The first one is about corporate footprint, corporate carbon footprint, which again, much more related to this scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And some companies are able to do 1 and 2, other companies are able to do 3. So this is work in progress for everyone. So none of it is right or wrong. What is wrong is not attempting to discuss it. But then when you talk about these, so you can see this very nice visual in the middle, the chevrons in the middle show you the difference between the product carbon footprint and corporate carbon footprint. And those are different concepts. And depending when you sit on the in the value chain, and depending what you are trying to achieve with your sustainability reporting, you are likely to be using those metrics. And so, for instance, as a supplier, you quite often will be requested some information about the data on your product carbon footprint that you're supplying to your customer. But as a corporation, investors are going to be asking you to show you what you are doing, and they can either support or penalize you for not making an effort. And so I think, again, is it difficult? Yes. Would we profess to be the experts? Absolutely not. And there is no need for that, because there are a lot of companies, there are a lot of solutions that help you go through this process. But I would say, if we were again to be a little bit contrary, we would say any company that tells you there is not enough framework or not enough support out there to even start on the process, we would strongly dispute that. We think the time is such that if you engage and spend enough time with the topic, you can actually start at least embark on these pathways. But then again, we have to recognize what makes a topic difficult to tackle, as opposed, for instance, last conversation that Annie had with Ian about base oils, which is also a very challenging topic. There is a disruption, but what makes sustainability different? So again, first of all, it's constantly changing. So even the frameworks we're talking about now, they will be refined, made more specific. So you need to watch the space, even when you think you understood it. Diversity, complexity. So we ask you a question in the poll. Is it corporate? Is it divisional? Because even if you have a great corporate footprint picture, there is a great corporate KPI around sustainability. If someone comes to their job, a sales and marketing person in somewhere in Indonesia who sells industrial lubricants, do they understand what it means exactly? So this whole complexity of translating external KPIs, internal KPIs into something that is very tangible. And we feel like this is where we would like to support the industry. And this is where we try to take the conversations today. The other thing is dependency. Now, we are a big industry. We have collaborators, we have competitors, but this is the topic that can be solved on your own, no matter how big the company is. None of the major oil companies, none of the kind of leading lubricant companies will solve it on their own. So there is an element of the need to create this collaborative approach, which can be very challenging, we recognize. And so the only two other points I would like to highlight when we think about why it makes so complex. Mega trends, and you probably are, oh my goodness, they are now talking about sustainability, and now she's going to start talking about digital, and that will all get super vague. But bear with me, the digital trend, which essentially in this context can be summarized of generating the data that gives you a lot more understanding and about how your equipment, how the use cases develop around the effectiveness of the lubricants you sell. It will be super important input into trying to develop your sustainability picture. So digital generates data. So if you have digital capabilities that enable you to tap into, develop and process the data, the upside of that, your sustainability story is going to become a lot more specific and a lot more tangible. And so last point to make, even if you did your own calculations and you found your own kind of 80-20, you still need to tell the story. And so it's important that you don't try to repeat someone else's story or to stay too high level, because this is where the greenwashing threat comes in. But we still believe that we have a lot of good story to tell in the industry, but the specificity and authenticity, which is very much depends on where your company sits in this value chain, this will be the key kind of contributors to success of this.
I think that when you talk about this convergence of digital and data with sustainability, I hear though some of our clients get a bit worried that the data might show the opposite of what their desire is, right? Or it increases that transparency where perhaps case studies and other lab tests and all other sort of data and evidence has been used in the past. So now we're really getting real world data, which can be a bit scary, right?
Absolutely. And to be honest, it's just when you choose to take the pain. So I would much rather know and face it than not know, and someone else will challenge me with that. So I certainly agree, Annie. It's not easy, and it's all gradual as well. That's important to emphasize.
Okay, well, and then another term we hear a lot about, which you sort of touched on a little bit there, is LCA, or life cycle analysis. And as you mentioned, there were some early starters on this, but more so recently, we've seen many companies announce that they have done LCA or are planning to have all products, LCA for all products by 2025 or what have you. And we're also hearing that some customers are asking for this as well. So how does this look across the lubes value chain, and what are some of the challenges? And subsequent question, how does this now link to the previous terminology we were just talking about regarding Scope 1 emissions?
Yeah, no, thank you, thanks, Anna. And this is how we took wisdom from many companies and many sources. So we are a bit of an aggregate on this one, but we hope this will be helpful. So you see, this is how we try to picture the value chain. And admittedly, when we say gate to gate, cradle to gate, we take a perspective of a lube marketer, which is sort of in the middle of this value chain. But so again, I'm sure this value chain is very familiar to you, but the whole idea about this life cycle analysis is to really not just focus on individual parts of this value chain, but try to combine as your product, as your raw material starts from, that's why this very nice analogy, cradle to grave, from the beginning of its life, which starts with raw material, all the way to the end of its life. And you would also hear the terminology cradle to cradle, which implies that we ultimately want to make it circular. So there's a limited amount of the waste and end of life solution that go nowhere. This is just an attempt to measure that. And so LCA doesn't mean that everyone has done cradle to grave, cradle to cradle. It means that people embark on this measurement. And so the easiest and the things are within your control. And to your point, Anya, this is the connecting point with Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. The easiest and the most accessible is to start with the things that you can control. So this is the whole gate to gate analogy. It's narrow, but it's doable. So even if the company communicates, well, I've done my LCA and based on gate to gate analysis, this is my data, it's still better than doing nothing, arguably. So the question is, what is your ultimate objective? And I think most are trying to go towards the kind of as broad of a view as possible. So we will see some attempts to do it cradle to gate, which will necessitate the company to go back to their raw material supply and either using proxy or using the real data to simulate what those raw materials are adding in terms of the overall carbon footprint. And then again, if we go from gate towards the end of life, that will imply going to the customers and understanding what exactly is happening when the product is being used. And ultimately also after use, either by, for instance, if you take used oil, we refine it or collect the material and sort of, so anything that is just not just burning, because let's face it, when it just goes this way and if there is no utility in the end of life, that's the situation we're trying to avoid. So not to oversimplify it, but what is important, it just kind of helps us think beyond our own bubble when we look at our own position in the value chain. And what is making it difficult, but at the same time very exciting, that the things that are most interesting are typically the things that can be outside of our control. And so we encountered, so Annie, you earlier asked, what are the challenges people are facing? So we, for instance, some people are saying, no, but it's very difficult to do because it's very confusing. The standards are confusing. The standards may not be complete, but there are plenty of standards. And some of them we are mentioning from around LCA, ISO standards that take you through the process. And there are the parties out there that can help you verify that you have gone through the right process to make claims. But then it takes time as well. Even if you are to engage the third party, you still need to make sure you have the resource and time and skills internally to interact with this party. And that's maybe one point that we haven't mentioned before, but when we talk about strategic, it's important to know that if sustainability is not someone's job, it's basically no one's job. It's very easy for this to fall through the cracks, especially after COVID, when it's so complex, the environment, and we mentioned that business survival could be top of mind for many people. How do you find space for sustainability? And so we think that it's important to somehow carve out a place in the organization. Either you have a sustainability manager or you delegate the specific role under key technical and commercial roles, but someone has to have the power and the ability and the knowledge to push this thing through, or at least to embark on this process. And so regional variation and priority also vary widely. It doesn't mean that it's top of everyone's minds, but if you attended any of the recent conferences, be that ILMA, be that ALIA, Asia, or US, or Europe, we all want to talk about it. So it means that there is enough evidence, there is enough interest to take it from abstract to concrete, but it has to be backed up with the organizational capabilities as well as external frameworks.
So Yana, we actually just got a really nice question in that, first of all, they say thanks for your fantastic presentation. But the question itself is, do you see any trends regarding circularity of lubes when it goes to end-of-life scenarios? In my opinion, the circularity has focused a lot on raw material and manufacturing.
Yeah, this is a very good question. And I think, what we're trying to say with this presentation is basically to say that nothing is inherently good or bad. And the danger is that if we only take a part of the story and we look at this part and say, well, if I do that, if I collect it, if I refine it, it means it's a good solution. As with, for instance, this whole debate about is electric vehicles, if you expand the horizon and compare from cradle to grave, is it really ultimately better than something else? Exactly the same point. So we have, again, Ian and Annie, we'll discuss refining a lot among ourselves. It depends, what is the structure? Is this, for instance, how do you collect? Can you effectively collect the oil? Is the quality of oil adequate for further processing? Do you have the facilities? So ultimately, it's about the data. It's probably certainly better than something like, for instance, burning it. But if you start comparing alternative routes that do have some utility, that's what the complexity is becoming kind of question. Do you refine it into a base stock? Do you refine it as sort of finished product? Do you then refine it fully into finished lubricants? And then, of course, what's happening as well, we have some of the most prominent companies in our industry who have done a fantastic job at sort of elevating the quality and the perception around refined base oils. So you also need to watch what tools are available to you, and they're not the same tools that were available 5 to 7 years ago. So, but certainly we think that this whole redefining after use and end of life has to be looked at in the context, not only what else is happening, but the country you are in, the sort of the alternative uses, and how the government is incentivizes or disincentivizes the process.
It's certainly the trickier one though, right? Because if you're a lubricant manufacturer or marketer, you have more control, let's say, over your raw materials than your own manufacturing processes. But once you've sold that, once that lubricant's left your factory, once your warehouse, then, that requires, a very complex, operation to kind of understand what's happening to the end of the life of the product, and requires, this is why sustainability, I think, always requires, this collaboration across companies, and collaboration potentially with competitors, and all this sort of challenges, additional complexity on top of it already.
But just to throw one thing here, which is a very specific example. So in the past, what you do with the end product becomes, well, what does the finished lubricant supplier enables the customer to do with the product? Here is how sustainability creates an opportunity. As a base oil supplier or as an additive supplier, you can ask yourself, Am I creating the formulation that enables the most optimal end of life for a specific formulation? And especially, again, which varies by country and everything else. So as you can see, and again, we have some, I will mention one name, but there are lots of others. I have always been really fascinated and grateful for companies like Neste, which really took a lot of effort to evaluate what happens to the base oil as it goes through the whole life cycle. Mm-hmm. And this is the mentality which I think would really help the base oil suppliers and additive suppliers, which are early on in this value chain, to think ahead how various attributes of their raw material ends up adding value. And in the past, it was just too far removed to really worry about. But now that end of life becomes a focus, mm-hmm. that kind of adds the additional benefits and additional claims around how easy or difficult will it be to close the loop on the end of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. To keep moving, could keep talking on this topic, but to keep moving onto a given time, it's always helpful to learn lessons from others. And the mining industry has been, measuring their scope 1, 2, and recently 3 emissions for some time now. So if we look at the mining industry and what they've been measuring over the last few years, what can the lubricants industry learn from this, Yana?
So again, we are fascinated by everything industrial, and we increasingly look towards sort of ahead of us rather than behind us or within our own little bubble. So mining has always been really interesting because just like in many ways, it's similar to like overall energy or oil and gas, because it has multiple uses, very complex combination of various raw materials, and has been under a lot of scrutiny to do better. In the broader context of license to operate by the environment has been a big part of it. So we have been trying to find an industry to show you, and we're thinking about chemicals, but actually mining is quite interesting. So in the previous half an hour, we told you need to measure. So that was the call for action. So, okay, this shows you what happens when you measure, right? Things don't necessarily become easier, or things become clearer, but not necessarily easier. So as you can see, this is based on companies reporting, and Financial Times did some really interesting features around this. This is what the companies discovered when they did the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. If you remember, things that are within your control, things that are outside of your control. The bulk or the light blue is actually outside of your control. So does it mean that you still shouldn't be doing much about it? Not at all, but it means that it allows you to say, look, governments, look, customers, we all need to work on this together, because no matter how much I try, I'm still tackling a fairly small part of this whole equation. And the only other thing to draw your attention to, so as you can see, there is a slight variation in how the companies are exposed, and that has to do with let's say what materials they're involved in. So if you're involved in the energy transition material, nickel, cobalt, lithium, etc., you can almost offset your own operation via scope 3, because then you get some credits because you supply, for instance, electric car, or maybe some renewable. So there's a bit of a counterbalancing. Now, if you're exposed to coal, that is going to be a tough picture to solve. And some companies, and you can see one of them, Freeport, they said very openly, we are really trying hard, and they're showing their investors, this is the efforts we're putting into estimation, but we are really struggling with scope 3, because scope 3 involves going to the customer, understanding exactly the context of use, but we are trying. And so, what is interesting is that quite often people say, well, if you don't have scope 3, it means you're not doing the right thing. It's not correct. If you really look at the ESG ratings, if you look at the investors' criticisms, it's never about having the perfect thing now. It quite often is about, we don't see enough evidence that you are doing everything that is within your power to first gain clarity, and secondly, start acting on that and having a plan. The plan can be long term, the plan can be challenging, the plan can have caveat, but there has to be a plan. And so the last point about what does it mean for our industry? Our hypothesis is, if we were to choose an interesting part of the story for lubricants to say, that will be a story about the value and use, because our products by nature reducing friction, fuel economy, and a number of other things that should be giving us very good evidence for why we also have a good stories to tell, but they're the ones who will tend to be most difficult to tackle as well. So it's this, everything that is good tends to be hard. And this is a part of this conversation as well.
I think what was interesting doing some research before this is I came across Rio Tinto's report on their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and the full calculations are there. Everything's there. It's a 100-page report. The thing about this, you know, all these calculations is it's public. They're having to publish all of this. So you can actually learn quite a lot from just looking at how other companies have tackled it and how they've addressed some of the challenges around how do you get the data for this and that, and measuring and comparing and tracking as well, which was really interesting.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so clearly it sounds like you might say that it's quite complex and potentially expensive. So do you think that companies can really wait and see till this complexity is resolved, or what do you think? You know, what we do today, and it seems if we're not doing anything now, it seems like a big ladder to climb.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a question like if and when, right? So you need to calibrate your level of effort by sort of realistic assumption. How much can you invest now? And is it an urgent issue, or is it an issue within 3 or 5 years? So if we just separate ourselves from the debate about the kind of those people who believe that it has to happen now, those people have to think that it has to happen gradually. If you refer to the same GHG protocol document, it gives you a blueprint. If I want to measure my footprint, this is the type of process I will go through with my suppliers. So for instance, if you an OEM, the chances are, if you are a supplier of a critical raw material or an important material, which in the case of lubricants, base stocks, of course, additives, which sometimes are very critical to performance, will be true. Lubricants, in some cases, for the engine oil manufacturers, could also be kind of classified as important raw material suppliers. So that already, and again, we're not going to go through detail of this picture, but you can clearly see already there is a very clear mechanism, what you should request and what happens if the supplier does not provide the data. Mm-hmm. So your ideal preference is that if you want to measure your own footprint, you approach your supplier and you ask them, do you have good quality data? So they can, if they say yes, that's fantastic. You engage with them, you understand how your mutual footprint looks like. Now, if they have, let's say, if they don't have the data, there is also a way out. Mm. And this way out, so we listed a couple of databases. There are some proxies that both Greenhouse Gas Protocol and others are using to provide you to fill the gaps. Mm. So the question you need to ask yourself, if you want if you don't want to put a lot of effort to do it yourself today, and you feel that no one is yet asking, would you like your customer eventually to go and use the proxy? Because the proxy might not necessarily present your own performance in the most interesting way. And also, would you like someone else's data, your competitors, to be used as the proxy for a certain type of material or for the certain type of let's say, chemical? So it's a very fine balance between knowing, based on your exposure, who your clients are. Are you in the automotive aftermarket? Are you in the industrial sector? Are you in the first field? To know, is it urgent? Or is it not urgent? But when we talk about not urgent, we're still talking about 3 to 5 years before this request will probably land on your table as frequently as you get requests for proposals. And therefore, our message would be kind of make a plan. If it's not today, make a plan for tomorrow. But it's based on what we have analyzed. There is no reason to believe that these requests are not going to become more frequent, more detailed, and your customers are not going to become more discerning.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is great, because one of the biggest things I think I hear is they say, oh, well, I don't have the data. And, you know, the GHG protocol actually lays out, you know, all the scenarios for that situation, right? So it's very useful. If you haven't read the document, I suggest that all our listeners really should, because it's a great guidance document. Okay, in the interest of time, which is flying by, let's keep moving. So I think it's important, Yana, that we understand who's actually shaping the narrative and the progress, not just internationally and the UN and GHG protocol, but actually also within our own industry. So can you take us through a bit of the key players that we need to be paying attention to, and maybe focusing more on the ones in our industry specifically, just in the interest of time?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, like only 2 messages. This is not one stakeholder, there's a lot of stakeholders. So for those of you who don't tend to kind of use your environmental analysis as a complex thing, there might be a need to enhance how you analyze your environment in the company, because unfortunately it's not simple. The regulation creates incentives. Then, you know, there's a national regulation, international regulation. countries are making net zero commitment, your clients are making net zero commitment. I would actually like to highlight one thing in this chart is so the investors, public companies will also be exposed to investors who are becoming much more discerning, but not necessarily want to go into the finer details. So they will look for a good story from public companies primarily, but then more and more saying that they want to also engage with the private companies and see how they're doing. And lastly, the associations. So I think, especially in Europe, and we're a little bit biased, we're based in Europe, but the pioneers were the German association that then did it with very well with UAL and ILMAS and ALIA and also ATL. Everyone is working on that. And so before we start deciding as individuals, I think there's a lot of valuable resources that they are working on, so certainly worth engaging. And they will be focusing on the common frameworks, common language, so finding an overall language as an industry, and then you can try to differentiate within this framework. So I would emphasize the role of associations, and again, I think they can be extremely useful in this context.
Yeah, I think they're really big. The associations are really beginning to take some leadership here. And again, it's about that collaboration, isn't it, within the industry, where perhaps in the past people have tried to be a little bit more siloed in the way that they approach new kind of themes, let's say. Okay, so just want to share with you. Where's my mouse gone? That the International Energy Agency recently published what has to happen for us to reach net zero by 2050. I don't propose to go into all the detail in this chart. You can read it afterwards if you're interested. But there, a lot has to happen for us to get to net zero by 2050. 60% of EVs by 2030. Huge growth in solar and wind and all sorts of other things. What they also shared, interestingly, is the key carbon CO2 emitting industries, right? So, the key industries of iron and steel and cement, etc., and what their contribution is to the CO2 emissions. Now, the question here, Yana, is what does this mean for us as a lubricants industry, given that we're serving all these sectors?
Yeah, no, thanks, Annie. And this is how this is where we were thinking a lot about it, because you read all of it, and if I'm a marketing manager or a sales manager and trying to make sense of it, like how do I make sense of it? And so there are a lot of things that are still quite highly speculative. So on the back of that report, half of the reaction of a lot of people was, well, clearly it's all impossible now. No, but it's not, it wasn't the purpose. The point is, and I think we use this quote, which I think is a very good one, by saying that the fact there are bottlenecks, clear controversies, clear challenges that have been highlighted in such great detail, this is good news. It means that it's shifting from being a theoretical construct to a reality, which means that money and effort are going to go to resolving these bottlenecks. So even if you disagree with whichever scenario you subscribe to, there are certain things that will happen, regardless of the intensity of the scenario. First of all, with mining, which supports renewable, which supports electrification, multiple industries, there's a consensus talk about the super cycle. So nickel, lithium. So let's say if you're in mining, you know that your customers in copper and Chile are going to look to maximize their productivity. If you want to be in some other minerals, you need to be in Indonesia, you need potentially to be in Congo, you need to be in other. So there's a very clear link between certain industries and certain customers will be benefiting from these trends, regardless of, let's say, with the intensity of the scenario. Then, based on the pie chart, and what you shared, which I think is really interesting, if you go to a customer in steel or cement, these are the customers for whom sustainability will top of their mind, because there will be so much scrutiny from everyone to do something radical. The care needs to be taken. Can you do much with lubricants, or are there any other means that essentially allow them to achieve much more impactful change? So you need to put yourself in the order of magnitude of the overall methods that they're using to achieve their improvement in their footprint. But ultimately, we also know that there will be acceleration of electrification. We know that will be more renewable capacity. The question you need to track where and in which sense. Is it solar? Is it water? What is the mix? What we also know is that, again, regardless of which of the scenario you subscribe, there will be investments into construction to build the infrastructure, be that charging, be that renewable power. So that is happening. And also you need to watch the governments, because they will introduce carbon pricing to make sure that there is a very clear carrot and the stick mechanism behind all these intentions. And so again, just to take you last mile, and we selected only a few areas. If you want to then say, what should I be discussing in my boardrooms or my management meetings? Some of the risks might be facilitated. So as client, we presented electrification scenarios. Some of them may be accelerated. Some may stay as they are, but it means that some of your parts of your business might be more exposed. The opportunities, again, for more sustainable raw materials, because you can come to the customers in those more exposed industry and try to contribute to their story. And whatever help they can get, they will take, because they will need to follow multiple levers to get there. But the sustainable raw materials would have to come with the proof. It can't be just, well, just because it's bio is good, or just because it's re-refined is good.
Yeah.
We also think there will be obviously products for naturally more green applications, such as like EV fluids, because you are now talking about sustainability benefits, which is the upside of the fuel efficiency or a lot of other benefits. You will have stronger claim for the product, better story to tell. And ultimately services, not to forget, the whole, if you measure, and especially if you combine it with the digital capabilities, showing people how not only they are improving the efficiency of the operation via fuel economy, via uptime, which is the classic lubricant related claims, but you also start tracking and helping them understand how you're improving their CO2 equivalent footprint, not just CO2, but also all the other greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
So this is in a simple way how we would suggest you have these discussions in your management meetings.
And also even stepping away from, let's say, the green messages, it just shows that there's a lot of growth opportunities in particular industries, right? So volumetric growth in particular industries. I think I read an interesting quote here from The Economist this week that says, to stay on track for net zero by 2030, annual production of electric vehicles needs to be 10 times higher than it was last year. The number of roadside charging stations 31 times bigger. The installed base of renewable power generation needs to rise threefold. Global mining firms may have to raise the annual production of critical metals by 500%. So, you know, of course, I say that not to sort of be shocking about the bottlenecks or anything. It's just actually the volumetric and value opportunities that some of these sectors will have for the lubricants industry. But okay, in the interest of time, Yana, I'm not going to let you even respond to my statement. Okay. I like this this next question, and this is our last slide. I've lost my mouse again. There it is. Too many screens. So okay, we've had a lot of kind of chat about our industry, other industries, IEA, net zero, But can you tell me what a sustainable lubricant actually is?
Yeah, so it's sort of client take on sustainable lubricant. This is not yet an industry standard. We will aspire, but we're just to sort of to throw something in the net. So again, the way, if there was one message we wanted to send, there is clearly will be a lot of solutions. But we think that if you look for one holy grail, this probably will not be the right idea. So everything is a solution, but nothing is the solution. So, and also each business, we again come back to our 80-20. What it means for you and which aspects and which benefits you need to focus will be very specific to what you do. So depending on the scope of your business and depending on what you identify as the highest point of your contribution. So what we have done, we have just analyzed everything that has been said and done in our internal discussions, in the conversations that you kind of kindly shared with us. And there are three almost like buckets of things that we can integrate from different discussions. So first of all, a lot of the focus in sustainable lubricants is quite often is about the raw material. Some of them are very specific, like for instance, eco-label certification or environmentally acceptable lubricants, which is, have very clear definitions. Others are sort of a little bit vague about biolubricants, and we have great webinars on the subject from our colleagues. Certainly, we'll recommend to sort of educate yourself. Or some of them will be really even more vague, such as partially based on re-refined base stocks. So sort of it's basically leveraging the intuitive perception that wherever is bio-refined, it must be good, which again is mostly around cradle to gate. So you focus on the raw material side, but it's not necessarily the sort of the only way of looking at it, because, and this is any magic, the other thing that comes to mind is certainly this value in use. And we think this could be very interesting work to be done here by the whole industry. So first of all, fuel economy related claims, same benefits, but the upside related to sustainability. We need to translate, we need to quantify to be able to tell a good story. Longer drain, fuel for life, all those benefits or energy efficiency, benefits related to industrial lubricants can also be converted into what it means for sustainability. Traditionally, for instance, in the area like metalworking fluids, we have a lot of health and safety related things. These all are there are different sides of the same multi-dimensional coin, so to say. And again, some of the stories we tell about we help our customers, they can also be converted into, you can add the sustainability element. And ultimately, what we start seeing with a lot of companies, either some of them are coming in the more across the broader range of products like Shell, other focusing on, for instance, wind like Castrol or any other areas. So we have loads of companies, I don't want to exclude anyone, that try to make the claims around carbon neutrality. Interestingly enough, in Germany, for instance, carbon compensated, which is even more specific way to highlight how they got there, or some, let's say, more vaguely defined claims like, for instance, contributing to zero waste, which is a little bit related to the questions we discussed earlier on. Certainly an important attribute, but needs to be better defined. And or, for instance, there are discussions about packaging, delivery, how we, for instance, deliver a product using more sustainable transport. So this is always good. But again, the full LCA will really help us tell a more holistic story. But I added one there just as a point to laugh about a bit. You will see some crazy things like CO2 free, which is obviously nonsensical. And so let's just make sure that whatever story you tell never has this type of claims, because it's just no one is that uneducated in either customer side or the supplier side to be able to fall for this type of narrative. And so the last point, I think I need just to conclude, nothing is, certain things are better or worse, but you can't claim that something is bad or good until you've done the maths and you've done the measurement. And the reason why it's important is because the metrics and the customer and the understanding, they all are becoming much more sophisticated. So you've got to keep up, and you can only claim what you can measure. And so this is our kind of where we are at, and we hope that this will, we hope will debate us, and we really hope that next time we speak will be in person and we can have a much more robust discussion about some of our findings.
Thanks, Yana. Yeah, gosh, we seriously, the hour's gone by. We've still got 5 minutes left. We'll have a few more questions. We'll share the results of the poll. We'll try to finish on in 5 minutes. But yeah, there's a lot to cover, and I think the time has flown by for me, certainly. Okay, so we have a couple of questions. Have some, but I think we should share. I'll just kind of chat through some of the key things from what the poll showed. What the poll showed us is that the majority of you, the major challenge for you is the lack of clear signals from the market. And I actually feel like, Yana, a lot that you've spoken about today hopefully shed some light on that that point.
Yes, I think that was my guess that this will come up as the major point. So 2 points to say. So you're waiting for the signals for the market. Your customers are going through the same thinking process. You might be waiting for a very long time. So maybe choosing some customers who are a little bit more advanced as the trial projects to just investigate, because this is a process that is very hard to predict, just standing on the sidelines and trying to conceptualize. Mm-hmm. And second point, if you flip this question, in the beginning we talked about asking the right question. And if you ask yourself, what will happen if you don't do it? What is the risk? Rather than asking who will pay us, how much will they pay us to do it, ask yourself how much share, how much market will you eventually use if you don't do it. Mm. That just changes slightly and maybe like shifts a little bit the point. And then the other question is, no one will do everything in the beginning. So everyone will move at their different pace. It's just about starting and having a plan.
Well, I think that links nicely to another question we had, because we see a lot of companies, the question is, we see a lot of companies promoting carbon neutral lubricants, mainly using the offsetting lever. Is this the strategy we should all be doing, and is that enough? Mm-hmm. I think you kind of answered that a little bit for us, but yeah.
I would sort of quote back our own, which is a bit vain, but it is a solution, but it is not the solution. And just to, again, referring back to the point that the standards will evolve. Eventually, the standards will make it very clear that before you offset and claim carbon neutral, you need to prove that you have eliminated and reduced. Currently, there is still a bit of ambiguity about this, but I think if you read carefully behind the announcements that the companies are making, to be fair, most of our peers in our industry, they make it very clear that alongside compensating, they also are taking measures to reduce and eliminate. And that is, I think, is the difficult thing. It's really you've got to say something, but if you say something, it will be scrutinized. It is true. No, there's no getting away from that, but we have to get over it and sort of get through it, because there are some much more useful and interesting discussion happening once we start kind of exposing ourselves to difficult subjects.
I also think that one of the key points is that, you know, it's at the moment, it's not necessarily about, you know, comparing your figures against your competition. It's more about showing you've done something and then tracking and hopefully reducing, right? So in time, surely it will become a competitive thing and maybe a procurement thing or what have you. But at the moment, it's a little bit still internal, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I would argue no one moves from doing little to being advanced. And so the danger of leaving it until everything is clear and it's clear how much the customers are willing to pay, what are the risks, is that by that, the early leaders, they will basically leverage and take value that is generated based on the opportunities. So, you know, kind of like early bird, you know, et cetera, but so it is a little bit of a strategic issue, and the appetite for risk and your financial situation, because you obviously need to be sustainable in more than one ways.
Now, we'll just wrap up in the last minute. The second most popular answer in the poll of the challenges was the lack of clarity around frameworks and standards. So again, hopefully, what we've shared with you today has provided a little bit of guidance around that, but it's still, you know, it's certainly not black and white. And so, but yeah, I think today's presentation has certainly helped with that.
And Anya, I think if we were able, Manas, to work something out, it's accessible to everyone. But we would say, it's just, to be honest, it's just about spending time, and it's just about going to people who are specialists in this area. A lot of them, their livelihood is about doing LCA, and obviously we need to. The associations are trying to put it in the context of our industry. Yeah. So associations, third parties specialize in LCA, and the framework like GHG. Then we referenced a couple of databases that should give you the proxies. That would be very useful resources to engage with. Just take your time and sort of.
Yeah, I think there's a good reading list there, right? If you haven't already, the GHG protocol, maybe looking at someone like Rio Tinto's Scope 1, 2, 3 emissions calculation report. And it all really sheds a lot of light on something that is not necessarily seen as very transparent initially. But I think once you get into it, it's okay. Okay, that brings us to the end of our session. We've really appreciated your time and contributions to all the questions. So possibly many more questions on top of this. We could have broken down this topic into many subtopics, and maybe we will. We'll probably be back doing another one of these in September. We'll take a little summer holiday off our Q&A sessions. But yes, Yana, have you got any other final words for the audience today?
Yeah, so we started with the homework, and I will finish with the homework. Could you please, if you would like to debate with us, if you would like to say something, well, I would like to see that, I haven't seen that. No, we are here for you, because just like you, we're trying to work out how we can be useful to you, our clients, our industry. So please do get in touch if you feel that, like Anya mentioned, for the subsequent conversation, should we go narrow? Should we go broad? Do you appreciate the outside-in view, like we talked about mining? So we try to give you a flavor of different things, and we're looking forward to your feedback. And please feel free to be as robust as possible. We can take it all. We don't like the silence. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Vera, as well.
And Annie, if you could, do you have the contact information? Your last slide.
Yes, thank you.
Sure that.
Yeah. But you can also get the recording of this as well, which will come with the slides and everything as well, right?
Yes, and it's actually by request. So if you're interested in recording, you'll have to connect with us. You'll have a follow-up email, everybody, tomorrow coming from the webinars at clientgroup.com. You can reply to that, or you can directly connect with Yana or Annie. You can send your information in front of you. And all that, all your requests will be fulfilled, I hope.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.